In the world of basketball, there are superstars who are loved by fans, adored by teammates, and respected by opponents. And then, there's Rudy Gobert. Previously laughed at by his peers, disrespected beyond belief by the fans, and considered an astronomical gamble by analysts after a blockbuster trade to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Rudy Gobert has now done the unthinkable. In this video, let's dive deep into Gobert's journey and examine how his unique set of skills has transformed the Timberwolves into a force in the Western Conference and in the NBA as a whole. Watch until the end and learn why the Wolves truly have a different mentality and why they are legit title contenders. Finally, did Rudy get his love back from the NBA community? Let's see. Back to his Utah Jazz days, Rudy Gobert was a defensive powerhouse already, regularly leading the league in blocks and rebounds. His presence in the paint was intimidating, and the French center earned the nickname the Stifle Tower for his ability to shut down opponents. However, his offensive game was often criticized, and many wondered if he would ever be a two-way player. He was unliked for his perceived lack of scoring ability and was often targeted by teams that would exploit his defensive play style during the playoffs. Some fans and analysts called him aloof and unlikable. They said he's not a good teammate and that he's not a leader. Gobert's teammates and coaches have defended him, saying that he's a great guy who works hard and cares about the team. Then, there was this incident during the COVID-19 pandemic, when Rudy Gobert infamously touched all the microphones at a press event as a joke. Days later, he tested positive for the virus, leading to the suspension of the NBA season. This act drew anger from the public and his peers, contributing to Gobert's negative image. I guess you could say he really spread his influence, not just on the court, but off it too. But the only thing he blocked that day was the NBA season. On a serious note, that incident coupled with Gobert's perceived lack of leadership actually led to growing friction between him and his teammate, Donovan Mitchell. Some fans and analysts believe that Gobert's defensive prowess was outweighed by his inability to connect with his teammates and lead the team to success. Just think about it, a player of Gobert's defensive caliber, a rarity in the NBA, and yet he was still seen as expendable. And guess what? He was expelled too, literally. In 2019, Rudy was not selected for the NBA All-Star Game in what was seen by many as a significant snub. And man, he only made things worse. Gobert cried during a press conference when talking about the snub. His emotional response was mocked by some players, adding to the chorus of critics who seemed to enjoy taking shots at him. Gobert's impact on the team's on-court performance also contributed to his negative image. Despite being one of the best defenders in the league, he has never led the Jazz to a deep playoff run, which left many questioning his ability to be the cornerstone of a successful franchise. Gobert's perceived lack of toughness was further exacerbated by incidents involving other players, such as a dust-up with Luka Doncic, where his composure was seen as lacking. Other players were picking fights with him too, like Miles Turner, who infamously got into a scuffle with Gobert, raising questions about his toughness and leadership once again. But then, the trade happened, sending Rudy to the Timberwolves, a bold move that shocked many. Maybe Rudy was excited to move to a new place with some fresh microphones to touch. Everybody else was saying it was a terrible move, that the Timberwolves had given up too much to get a soft player like Gobert. The picks, the players, the cash considerations. It seemed like a king's ransom for a player who, until that point, hadn't been able to change the fortunes of his former team. The Wolves already had Karl Anthony Towns, a supremely talented offensive player, but the pairing of Towns and Gobert was met with skepticism. Critics argued that their playstyles were incompatible, that Gobert would clog the paint and limit Towns' effectiveness. Back when Jimmy Butler was on the team, he called Cat and the Wolves soft. He couldn't even make it work with them and had to leave in frustration. Gobert's arrival seemed like just another recipe for disaster. The Wolves couldn't maximize Cat's talent, so how could they possibly make it work with Gobert, who wasn't even known for his offense? Their rising star at the time, Anthony Edwards, similarly to Towns, also seemed doubtful to mesh well with Gobert's defensive-centric play. With Edwards' explosive driving ability, many thought Gobert's presence in the lane would only serve as an obstacle, potentially stunting Edwards' growth and the team's offensive fluidity. It got even uglier with the incident on the bench when Rudy punched his teammate Kyle Anderson. His own teammate! Although some were even proud of Rudy for finally standing up for himself, the team chemistry seemed beyond repair, and the media was in a frenzy. At that point, it looked like the Timberwolves had made a colossal mistake, a misstep that would set the franchise back years. Gobert was labeled as a cancer to the locker room, someone who couldn't get along with others and was detrimental to team morale. What could possibly go right for the Wolves to justify such a trade? Because believe it or not, things slowly started to change. Gobert began to adjust his game, and the coaching staff implemented new strategies to better integrate him into the offensive flow. The Wolves started winning, and the narrative began to shift. Everyone was healthy to start the 2023-24 season, and it seemed like the pieces were finally falling into place. The Timberwolves were syncing up, with Gobert anchoring the defense and contributing more on the offensive end than ever before. The criticism started to fade as the wins piled up, and Gobert's impact became undeniable. Towns and Edwards found ways to collaborate with Gobert, exploiting his screen-setting ability and improved passing to open up spaces on the floor. The trio began to dominate, dispelling the doubts of the past with each victory. You can feel that Rudy wants his respect, as he had pretty much been written off as a one-dimensional player. Now, he was showing versatility, and even his harshest critics had to admit he is playing a pivotal role. The Timberwolves' gamble is starting to look like a stroke of genius. The atmosphere in the locker room had transformed, and the team is rallying around Gobert's renewed commitment to the team's success. Karl Anthony Towns, who is still kind of making a name for himself, has greatly benefited from Gobert's defensive presence. With more freedom to operate and less pressure on the defensive end, Cat has been able to focus on what he does best: scoring and stretching the floor. Together, they've proven to be a formidable front-court duo, challenging the narrative that they couldn't coexist on the court. Same goes for Anthony Edwards, who has leveraged Gobert's rim protection to be more aggressive defensively on the perimeter. His confidence in taking risk has grown, knowing that Gobert has his back. Edwards is turning into a fantastic two-way player. The synergy between them has turned the Wolves into contenders, and the talk of the league shifted from skepticism to admiration for what they were accomplishing together. Yes, some players might still be hating on Rudy Gobert, and the incident with Draymond Green when he tried to choke Rudy is proof that rivalries and intense emotions are still a part of the game. However, that's Draymond, and this didn't deter Gobert. Instead, he says he feels empathy for Green, and it has fueled his determination to prove his worth on the court. That incident aside, the other players started showing more respect to Rudy Gobert. Even his critics started to see that a change was happening, that the Timberwolves' environment was conducive to his style of play. They began to acknowledge his contributions, not just defensively, but as a more versatile player who could impact the game in multiple ways. Like him or not, Rudy Gobert is elite, as Joe Ingles mentioned on JJ Riddick's podcast, summing up the sentiment around the league. As the season progressed, the Minnesota Timberwolves climbed the standings, with Gobert being a central figure in that ascension. His improved relationship with his teammates was evident in their on-court chemistry. Gobert's willingness to adapt and his teammates' acceptance created a unity that was previously missing. What's important, the Wolves came into the season with a different mentality, a determination to shake off the doubts and to prove that their unique mix of talent could indeed find harmony. Their defense is anchored by Gobert, who is not only a shot-blocking force, but also skilled at altering shots and covering the pick and roll. This defensive prowess allows the team to play a more aggressive style on the perimeter, knowing they have a reliable last line of defense. With Gobert's ability to switch and guard multiple positions, the Wolves' defense had become more flexible and dynamic. On the offensive side, the team has started to capitalize on Gobert's screening capabilities, using him to free up shooters and slashers. This has opened up the floor for Cat and Edwards to exploit their individual strengths, leading to a more potent offensive strategy. Anthony Edwards confirms Rudy is the reason the Wolves are where they are, and his commitment to both ends of the floor has inspired the rest of the team to step up their game. Jaden McDaniels is an example of a player who has elevated his play in part due to Gobert's leadership. Mike Conley is dishing out assists like it's second nature, finding Gobert on the roll and shooters on the perimeter with a newfound efficiency. The Wolves are on to the best franchise start in history, and the buzz around the league is that they are not just a fluke. With Gobert at the center of this transformation, the Timberwolves are seen as a real threat in the West, and maybe even beyond the West. Who knows? They might as well be setting their sights on the NBA title.